which is the Marine Weapons School out in Yuma, Arizona. From that point, I went down to Eglin Air Force Base and helped stand up the 1st Marine Squadron, which is VMFAT 501, which is the training squadron which teaches pilots how to fly the F-35. And then most recently, I moved this last fall from Eglin Air Force Base out to Yuma, Arizona, where I'm currently the commanding officer of VMFA 121, which is the 1st operational squadron for the Marine Corps and the Department of Defense. Currently, our squadron, it's fairly robust. It has 260 Marines. We have 17 airplanes, and we are in the process of operationalizing the airplane and getting it ready for initial operational capability, of which we'll declare in the summer of 2015.
So let me direct this one to Sniff. So let's imagine that when you got to the Rippers was what, 2000? What year was that?
I got that right there in the beginning of 2000.
Okay, so let's imagine we had a time machine and 2000 Sniff was talking to 2014 Sniff. What would 2014 Sniff say to 2000 Sniff about the JSF?
So when I talk to my contemporaries out in the fleet and I try to describe to them what this airplane's all about, and quite honestly, I leave out the Tomcat because there aren't too many Tomcat pilots left out in the fleet these days. So I compare it to my experiences in the Super Hornet, and how I like to describe the capabilities of F-35. It's got unbelievable flying qualities. It's extraordinarily easy to fly. So what's that mean? It's going to cut down on training time. It's going to allow the pilots more bandwidth to be able to operate the sensors, to be able to assess the information that's coming into the cockpit. It's got performance that's comparable to an F-18 Super Hornet, slick, with no pylons, no external fuel tanks. Speaking of that, it's got 20,000 pounds. The C variant has 20,000 pounds of internal gas. That's a Super Hornet with 2 external fuel tanks. It's got internal payload capability, and with that, it comes really to the core of the airplane, which is low observability, the stealth capabilities, and that's what really makes it the 5th-gen fighter. And I think when you look at that package as a whole, there isn't an aviator out there who wouldn't be dying to get into that cockpit today.
So, Steve, I think it's interesting that you're not a Harrier guy. You are a Hornet guy. So can you speak to the STOVL capabilities of the airplane, or can you speak to what you think that this capability is going to bring for you as a conventional takeoff and landing kind of guy?
Sure. I have had the opportunity to fly the F-35 and the what we call Mode 4 during STOVL operations. And as I was telling some of my colleagues up here, the first time that I decelled through 60 knots at 150 feet AGL, from a previous life, that's a very uncomfortable position that you would find yourself in. What I would say, though, is that through flight tests and the engineers and the way that they have mechanized the flight controls, hovering the airplane, landing it vertically, or utilizing the short takeoff capability is incredibly easy. The airplane handles magnificently when you're in the hover, and it is, from a training perspective, it's not a huge task as in other platforms, or you don't have to spend as many resources in terms of time and simulator training to get somebody to be proficient at that skill set. On a grander scale, the capability of being able to land vertically or take off gives the Marine Corps specifically the capability to deploy this airplane to many different areas or locations, whether that's amphibious shipping, whether that's shorter runways that previously would not be available to a conventional type airplane. And we will continue to develop the capability, but it's something that I think that the Marine Corps and the nation will appreciate as we operationalize the airplane.
So Crash is a man after my own heart because he's currently a CAG ops officer. That was my last fleet job in the Navy. So Crash, you certainly deal with training on a daily basis to include, the fact there's only 24 hours in a day, to include that there is finite OPTAR. So when I think of the weeks before going on cruise, or the weeks before going on a workup, I think of flying out of Fentress at 2 and 3 in the morning, sort of like a Detroit area hockey kid, right, looking for ice time. And so that was a huge quality of life sump, and it was also a big bandwidth training sump. Can you mention some of, because we've talked about capability and ease of training, can you mention what you think the quotient is that could be realized by this airplane's inherent flying capabilities and ease in the pattern, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Without a doubt, compared to the gentleman on my left, you're right. I have the least amount of flight time in the Charlie, so they'll get in, 2 test pods to my left. I'm a blue-collar flyer, and the one thing I noticed right off the bat is that in the administrative phases of flight, this aircraft is very docile. We started to talk about Fentress. Well, for us down at Eglin, our outlying field is going to be Choctaw. And as we get ready to send this jet to the boat in October for the first developmental test, we're going to see how this aircraft really behaves at the boat. But even with our limited exposure so far, it's easy to tell that this aircraft is going to be a treat to fly behind the boat. These guys, if you care to ask, will get into the mathematics behind the improved direct lift control and alpha this and theta that, and I won't muddle through that. But what I will tell you is that translates, even at this juncture, hard to quantify, but I can tell you without a doubt, we see the number of FCLP sorties going down. The automatic mode of approach may actually be the primary control method, with manual being a backup, which if you talk to old guys, that's counterintuitive. But when you see how well this plane flies, and I'm trying not to oversell it for Lockheed, it's going to translate. That'll translate to reduced sorties, to prepare for the boat, like you said. That gives you some of your schedule back, which can be crucial when you start talking about ops tempo. I think when you get out to the boat, translates, technical challenges aside, more first pass arrestments, higher safety margin, less sea space consumed, and ultimately over the life of the program that translates to dollars. So it may be a bit premature, you may have to hold me this, but I'm willing to bet we're going to see some improved performance at the boat based on some of the stuff that the engineers have done, and that's not me, that's this guy's right here.
So Giggs, you mentioned that you've been flying the airplane or been around the airplane since '03. The layman would go, that's a long time. Can you speak to your confidence in where we are and what you're thinking from the prime contractor point of view?
Yeah, if someone was to ask me back in 2003 what I saw were going to be the hurdles, the technology leaps we were making in this aircraft, what did I see as the hurdles we had to overcome? Clearly, the Stovall lift system was one of those that had everyone unease early on. When we first started flying BF-1, our first Stovall test jet, the big question was whether or not we engaged the auto-eject mechanism before we engaged the lift fan. That was the chicken and the egg argument we have. Do we trust the auto-eject or do we trust the lift fan? It was a unique discussion we had. We finally got down to the point where we trust the lift system more than we trust the auto-eject. Okay? And we've proven that out. The auto-eject is now, we've got it all up and operational. It's active on every Stovall flight. But those are the lift system was one of those ones where we thought, man, that's something we haven't done really before. We haven't matured that yet. There's going to be big problems. The EHAs, the electrohydrostatic actuators, we were worried about that. Basic structural integrity of the aircraft had us worried. Are we going to meet it? We haven't seen any of those issues really raise their ugly head. The issues we've had to overcome in flight test are the small things that you normally have to overcome in any flight test program. And please keep in mind, we are in the middle of a flight test program. Our job in flight test is to stress the aircraft, look for things that are problems, and fix them, actively fix them. And it's not Lockheed fixing them, it's the team. It's government test pilots, it's Lockheed test pilots, it's Lockheed engineers, it's government engineers. Everything we do on this program is open kimono. This program is the most heavily scrutinized program around. We can't afford to hide anything, and we can't hide anything, and we're not doing that. Everything we do is out in the open, and we're fixing all those little nits, I call them, that are out there. Some of those nits get blown completely out of proportion. That happens. That's okay. Let it happen. We have the hard job of going back and finding the technical solution and then implementing it, and that's what we do in flight test. So that's what we're doing right now. And how's my confidence? I'm exceedingly confident in this airplane. I'm excited for my young son who's 14 years old who wants to be a naval aviator. I'm excited for him because I want him to fly this jet in combat. Not that I want him to be in combat, but I know that he would go into combat and he'd have an unfair advantage against the enemy. I know he'll do that because we're producing an aircraft that's going to do that for him. We don't want parity. I listened to a lot of discussions earlier today looking at strategic implementation of foreign policy and how we're going to do things. This airplane is a tactical fighter. but it also has strategic implications when you put it on the deck of an aircraft carrier or on an L-class ship and you forward deploy it in the Pacific Rim. It should scare people that we have that capability. And hopefully, in 2015, 121 is going to deploy it. And that should scare the bad guys across the pond.
So I'd like to open up to questions. I guess, Paul, we're getting these via email or somehow. So first question, please.
First question, what current training range capabilities are lacking to fully support JSF training and readiness requirements? And how should we prioritize range investments to prepare for JSF fleet training requirements?
If that was in English, I didn't hear it. Anybody hear that? Anyone?
Sorry,
we can't
I'll
understand
repeat
you,
it.
sir.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
You guys making that out?
What current training range capabilities are lacking to fully support JSF training and readiness requirements?
Training range.
Training range.
So TNR question.
TNR.
So 5th gen platform, right? We're used to our training ranges out in Fallon and Nellis, and we'll try to keep this at the unclass level, obviously. It's a 5th gen plane, so we're spending a lot of money on the high-end capability that this jet brings to the table to include a suppression of enemy air defense mission, which typically strike fighter guys don't do unless you're an F-16 CJ guy or now a Growler guy. So it stands to reason some of our current range and infrastructure are lacking some of the high-end mission sets and the emitters that we need to fully realize the capability of this platform. What I'll tell you is these requirements have been identified. We know what we would like. The requests have gone in. It remains to be seen within this fiscal climate whether we will get that full-end capability, but it would stand to reason in order to really get the most out of this Maserati, it would make sense that the training ranges would keep up. So beyond what's already existing in the ranges as far as airspace and current emitters, there is some future capability that is spec'd out. And I think that's about the level of detail I can get into in this forum. Does that answer the question, whoever it's at?
And during, we don't just have to have one guy answer. If anybody else has anything to supplement.
Yeah, I can add to that. So along with, as we're developing the tactics of how to employ this airplane, one of the constraints that we're seeing in terms of the range limitations is just the physical space. And we're seeing this whether you fly F-18s, as F-18 capability continues to advance, F-16, F-22. Additionally, supporting assets that are out on the range, whether it's red air, whether it's surface-to-air replicators, et cetera. All of those things have been addressed, as Crash said. We're taking a hard look at that. Something that we're using currently to mitigate some of those shortfalls is we have very high fidelity simulators. And so when we get to the types of missions where it's a very high threat environment in terms of numbers of bad airplanes, numbers of surface-to-air threats, we can very well replicate those environments to close the gap of what we see out on the range and the types of missions that we need to train to, and we're doing that. And it will just take some time to address some of the other issues of physical size and space of ranges and things out on that range, and I'm confident we'll do that.
Thank you. Excuse me. Next question. What will the JSF provide in support of the change of DoD focus to the Pacific, specifically in the maritime role?
Again, I feel like I'm going to be answering all these questions, but as we focus on developmental tests and fledgling, fleet replacement squadron initial training, I think the thing that excites me is 2 or 3 chess moves down the road from now. I'll talk specifically about the Navy. Glibby back me up on the Marine Corps stance, but if you look at CAG-5 forward deployed, about the time we head towards IOC, we're going to be taking this JSF, we're going to be putting it on the Reagan most likely. We're going to put it alongside high-lot Super Hornets, some Growlers, and an E-2D, and provide an integrated capability that air wings just haven't seen before. West pivot, Pacific rebounds. Obviously, we have the strike fighter missions that we're familiar with, but as I walk around this auditorium, I realize there's a lot of other things this jet can do to tie into the network-centric battle space. Whether it's the Desron Commander or some of the other joint assets in theater, this plane is going to bring a lot to the table for the different different warfare commanders and the theater commanders.
Additionally, from the Marine Corps side, and in the Navy right now, are what, 10 or 11 carriers that we have right now? 11. So certainly a great capability, but with the F-35B and incorporating that into amphibious shipping, you now double the size of those capital ships in the U.S. inventory. You can do distributed ops in great vast areas of space, specifically for their own mission, whether it's for a raid or some type of support to a ground unit on the Marine Corps, the Joint Force, or to integrate into a larger force package. But in terms of its operational and strategic influence, that's doubling that number of capital ships with 6 F-35s floating around on an LHA or LHD, I think that that's significant.
So, I mean, obviously we'll keep it on class, but so if you can envision, and Sniff, you and I had this conversation down at Pax River last week, executing with whatever the fleet nomenclature the X-47 is ultimately going to be. But, I think too often we conceive of the JSF in passing as the be-all, end-all, like that's the only airplane that would be launching off the front end or launching off the top of the LHA or the LHD. So where would a Joint Strike Fighter fit, say, in a non-permissive environment with all the complement you guys are talking about? Where would you put the JSF?
So right now, the concept for the network-centric ConOps is that F-35 is going to be the central focus. It's going to be the predominant information collector and distributor in the air wing. There'll be a time and a place for the F-35 to go forward and to go it alone, and that's into the anti-access, area denial type of environment. And that's where the 5th gen is truly important to us, to be able to go into those highly contested areas and be able to go it alone, where, quite honestly, our 4th gen and our support platforms just don't have the capability to come with us as the total package.
Well, we all know the threat's not sitting stagnant either, right? So if you look at what's going on in the Pacific Rim today and the airplanes that are being developed by those air forces, it's getting less and less permissive, which makes the F-35 more and more relevant. There's been a lot of question about, do we need this much capability? Do we need this stealth? Do we need this in our force structure? The strategic thinkers unilaterally come to the same conclusion. It's a must-have, because the forward 4th generation aircraft, their vulnerabilities are going up at an exceeding rate. The F-35 is already steps ahead of those capabilities. We need to maintain that force structure, we maintain that technology edge, and that's what the F-35 gives the carrier battle group. We give the carrier battle group and the L-class a first strike capability. We've never had it before. We've had to wait for infrastructure to come, be there in place, supporting assets, supporting elements to support how we operate as an air wing strike package going in theater. Not that those days are over by any means, but you remove the requirement to a degree that the F-35 can operate in a non-permissive environment, create a permissive environment, and then the rest of the air wing as a force multiplier becomes even that much more effective. So working in concert with existing aircraft, the F-35 as itself is a force multiplier for the rest of the carrier battle group and the rest of the air wing with the Marines.
I would also say that our tactical focus right now, as we begin to bring the F-35 online in the Marine Corps, is not how do we just do operations, pick the mission, it doesn't matter, singularly with just F-35. In fact, I would say the majority of our focus is how do we integrate, enhance, and help other platforms, which are in much greater numbers right now, certainly in the Marine Corps, but across the DoD, of how do we enhance their mission capability to ensure success. So that's our focus right now. And I think as you start to see the DoD transition from a primary 4th gen platform centric force over towards the F-35, I think that our focus is correctly right now, and that you'll see it eventually transition to a more F-35 centric focus.
Next question, please.
Are there any flight deck environment concerns for CVN ops?
That's a great question. In fact, I was on the hangar bay of VX-23 last week, and that's the exact question I asked sniff. I remember Tom Ricks was criticizing the V-22 in terms of that sort of thing. Can you imagine the Marine Corps with a nuclear submarine? And so I think if you look at the history of the V-22 and maintainability in the field, they've proved that fallacy wrong. So same drill here. You know, we all know how dirty a Tomcat will get, 5 months into cruise, and how grimy the flight deck environment is in general. So when you think of a low observable consideration, what's our sense of how this plays out over the long haul?
So to answer both questions, kind of slightly different, and I'll focus on the C model. I think that was what the question was specifically about, and then I can hand it over to Glibby to talk about the B model specifics. But yeah, there are going to be some challenges integrating this airplane onto the carrier, and most of them have been identified, and we have a whole team full of folks who are working through those type of issues right now. To get into maintainability and supportability F-35, which is one of the key tenets of the program, talking about maintaining the low observability, there will have to be a paradigm shift out in the fleet. Maintainers, they are going to have to come into the 21st century when it comes to taking care of these technologies. No longer can we allow our airplanes just to get grubby and grimy and wash them once a month. It's going to take daily support. It's going to take a whole squadron effort in order to maintain these capabilities that we need, especially on fleet, which is a different mindset than we have right now, on cruise, where on cruise right now is when we sometimes let the airplane start to get a little bit dirty. We accept some more wear and tear because the operational environment is demanding. That's going to be the time when we are going to have to be most vigilant with the LO maintainability. Now, I will say, I have been pleasantly surprised in the last 2.5 years flying this airplane now in a very different environment, a little bit more sterile environment in the test and evaluation world, where we keep all of our airplanes indoors and in hangars. But quite honestly, we haven't been losing missions due to cure times and the LO maintainability. And I'll let Gig speak a little bit more on that if he's got a few things to chime in. But there are some other issues with integration to aircraft carrier. So it is a very noisy jet. We're looking at having to use some sort of noise cancellation headsets for our maintainers up on the flight deck, potentially even those who are working on the O3 level that have high exposure times to the amount of noise that F-35s can be putting off. Also, again, it's just some of the things like being able to change boxes on this airplane. Changing the engine is very different. It pulls out instead of dropping down below the aircraft like on the F-18. But we have a whole group of engineers and logisticians who are working diligently in order to make sure that we've identified, squared away, and have a plan for supporting this aircraft on the carrier.
Well, this is a great question, because one of the initial things we did early on in the program with the customer was identify LO supportability. We got an entire group that's their entire function is doing that. And what we've done is we've identified LO supportability at the operational level. So it's not the F-22, it's not F-117. Those are legacy approaches to LO maintainability. We had to design LO maintainability for the flight deck of a carrier or an L-class ship. It had to be done at the lowest possible operational level. And it's one of those tours, if you come to Lockheed, they take you in this little dark room and they show you a bunch of sailors and a bunch of Marines working with the engineers, perfecting all the stuff that goes into maintaining LO. And it's exceedingly simple these days with what they've come up with. And it's novel concepts for maintaining the LO of the jet. And, Sniff kind of hinted on it. We haven't had any issues with it so far. We're going to go to the ship here on the carrier this year. We've been on the L-class ships twice. But we got to see the normal wear and tear, and that's what OT is going to find out, if these concepts and these practices we put in place are going to work. But so far, all the indications are, it's almost a non-event.
So, Steve, you're probably the best guy to answer this, really, with actually in an operational squadron and in an expeditionary environment. What would you add to that discussion?
Yeah, well, I would say that many people had concerns when they close their eyes and they think of Marines who are typically pretty hard on their gear, their ability to maintain an LO jet. What I will tell you is that the Marines in my squadron view the LO characteristics and the LO care as any other weapon system on the airplane. And that transition of mindset of, hey, it's important that our radars work, it's important that our EW systems work. They view it in the same way. From a practical standpoint of what it takes to do that, yes, there are some cure times, and I think that that will become more efficient over time, but they are doing it, and they are doing it very well, and that's been confirmed by, they'll do intrusive maintenance on a jet, they'll restore the LO of the airplane, and it's just as good as when it rolled off the factory in Fort Worth. As far as the L-class shipping and the maintainability at sea, we have some data on that already, as we did DT1 and DT2, where we took F-35Bs out to the LHA, and I'm sure there was great lessons learned of what it takes and some challenges that they found. But I do think that there'll be some more learning that we have to do as we go for extended periods, in the saltwater environment of what that does to the jet.
So just, LO is low observable. I guess we were taking that acronym for granted. Stealth capability. Again, as Tomcat guys, if you had said stealth circa 1984, you would have been wrestled to the ground for one thing. But something we take for granted now. So Gen 5, that capability in the F-117 was not easily attained and took decades. So similarly, so are we talking about a new generation of capability. Next question, please.
What are the biggest challenges for the Marine Corps to reach its operational goal by 2015?
That's a good
I
question.
guess this one's mine.
Yeah, I think this is yours. Right?
Okay, so a couple different things that we need for IOC. One is going to be 2B software. The next thing that we're going to need is we have to do some modifications to the LRIP 4 jets that we've delivered to Yuma. And then the last thing is that we'll need weapon certification and the ability which will come with the 2B software. So with that being said, the modification schedule that our airplanes have to go through from now until the summer of 2015 is a pretty robust schedule. I know that the team at the Joint Program Office as well as Headquarters Marine Corps are scheduling what those modifications timelines will be. And right now we feel that we have a good path to get there. So that's number one. Number two, 2B software is currently in flight test right now. 2BS4 is what they're currently, or a version of 2BS4 is what they're flying. We're seeing good results. There's things that they're still correcting in that software before it's delivered, and I have every confidence that that will deliver on schedule. The last piece is going to be the weapons release certification. And again, everything that we've seen so far for the SDD weapons, AIM-120, GBU-32, and GBU-12 for the Marine Corps, there's no big showstoppers for that. So all in all, it's going to be a very busy 16 months from now until July of 2015. But we don't see any roadblocks that aren't that are going to prevent us from reaching that goal.
And the deployment is going to be, what, to Iwakuni or aboard an amphib, or what do we think we're going to do there?
Yeah, so right now the squadron is preparing to replace the F-18 squadron in 2016. So the Marine Corps will IOC in the summer of 2015, and then VMFA AW-242, which is currently in Iwakuni, 121 will move the squadron to Japan and take over that role in the Pacific Theater.
Next question.
Do we have adequate air-to-air weapons in terms of range and inventory to match the capabilities of the F-35?
To match, can you say that again? The last part threw me off.
Do we have adequate air-to-air weapons in terms of range and inventory to match the capabilities of the F-35?
I'll let Sniff answer that. I mean, I think these weapons are designed for the capability of F-35, but
So I want to answer this with just one word, and it's yes. This is one where we would get into a discussion that we can't have in this venue, but absolutely, we have the weapons. That's part of the design of the airplane. Is it was designed to support very specific weapons that meet its capabilities. So in a nutshell, yes, we have the right weapons on board right now. Now we don't have, and we won't have to meet the Marine Corps IOC the full complement of weapons that we want this airplane to be able to carry. That's going to come over time. And that's an iterative process through test and evaluation to make sure that we can safely carry, separate these weapons, and that they're effective and they meet all the effectiveness measurements that they need to before we send them out to the fleet.
So,
Yeah,
NAVAIR uses this
You know,
term
Cord, let me
called-
add something real. That's a great question, and we do have, as Sniff said, the right weapons. But I think it's important we acknowledge within the tactical, almost strategic community, that within the United States, we need a new AIM-120. We need a longer air-to-air weapon on even the F-22. That's a different program, a different discussion to have, but we have the best, and we're going to incorporate the best air-to-air missile we have, and it's a great weapon. But looking over the horizon, it's probably something maybe as industry we need to start getting active on, is supplying a longer and more kinematic, longer range weapon for air-to-air intercepts. That's a limiting factor right now on some of the stuff that's going on. If you war game out some of those scenarios, that's kind of the Achilles heel of the U.S. fighter fleet across the board. Great weapon, but we need longer or better kinematics right now.
So let me just add one more thing that we talked about. We hit on it a little bit earlier when we started talking about the network-centric con ops. So right now when we think about weapons, and the question was, does the F-35 have the right weapon on board? Hopefully down the road, that might not necessarily be the concept that we're supporting. It may not matter what weapon we have on board, and it may not matter where that weapon's coming from. I find a target, I pass that information out over the network, and maybe I even pull the trigger in my cockpit, but the weapon doesn't come off of my jet. It may come off of a different platform. That's where we're heading right now. So it may not be the AIM-120, and it may not be integrated on my airplane.
Right.
Thank you. Next question. Are there any lessons learned you would share with other multinational cooperative programs, specifically regarding working and/or collaborating successfully with coalition partners?
Maybe it's a Giggs question. The international component to the program, can you speak to that?
Well,
general
you know, it's a big program and it's hard sometimes, but the fact that the U.S. is the lead and Lockheed, everyone kind of works through the program office, we've done a really good job. And it's a tough job to do. The guys and gals working in the program office have done a stupendous job of managing that. The leadership within Lockheed, working with our partners, both the mission systems and weapons and everything else, have done a great job. The unique thing is we're all focused on the same goal, and it's providing the warfighter with the best capability we can, given the constraints of the program. We didn't have an unlimited checkbook. If we did, we could have done all kinds of other things, but we didn't have that. But working in this program has been interesting. If you look at other collaborative programs, Eurofighter, an example, took forever to get out and never really reached the capability it wanted. Other programs, the Jaguar in the UK, and those are good airplanes, but we're exceeding those expectations. You know, we're fielding 3 different airplanes here at the same time. We're meeting IOC timelines. We have had speed bumps we've had to overcome. No one's going to hide that. We've had issues, but like I said earlier, none of the issues we've had have been the issues any of us thought were the train wrecks we thought were going to happen. So it's been difficult, but working together, industry and the program office through the U.S. military and our partner countries, it's been a learning point for me for the last 11 years working with those groups, because it's been, we use the term best athlete. And sometimes we didn't have the best athletes working on certain things, but we fixed that. But what we've done is we've gone out to industry, we've asked for the best we can get, we've incorporated it, and working with the government, I think we've done a heck of a nice job of producing the aircraft that was meeting the ORD requirements that were written years ago, which was this airplane. You know, it's meeting the operational requirements document that was set in place, 10, 15 years ago.
One thing that I'll add on the international piece is my time at VMFAT 501 down at Eglin Air Force Base, the Integrated Training Center. In our squadron, we integrated 2 UK pilots, both one from the Royal Air Force, one from the Royal Navy, and 13 maintainers, which was a mix from both of those services. And I can tell you that the teamwork that happened there, the integration was complete. Very effective, and all of the lessons learned that we as the Marine Corps, we trying to operate this thing for the first time, had a direct link back to the UK to try and advertise what we were seeing, if we saw issues, what we thought the fix was. And it was a very collaborative effort, and it continues to be as we get ready to start operational tests for 2B, of which then they'll detach from 501 and move on to complete operational tests.
You know, and as you look further down the horizon and think strategically, we talked earlier about these coalitions we have to establish. This aircraft becomes a centerpiece when our partner nations are operating the same aircraft with the same configuration and the same AOR. Those synergies that happen from that and the collaboration that happens between our military forces, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and those forces and how we operate in the next theater of operations, you know, we've bridged all those gaps. It's not it's a smattering of different airplanes trying to operate together procedurally. Not only will we operate procedurally together, but technology is going to be on par. And how we operate those aircraft and maintain them is going to be the same. It's a different way of viewing coalition warfare with using the same tools.
Yeah, that reminds me of OSW operating with Sea Harriers, right? They could barely make it from Carrier Box 4 to Basra.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a big deal. I want to put a finer point on what you were talking about, Sniff, with respect to the spiral development piece, right? So when any of the type model series reaches IOC, it'll have a baseline capability, but there is a plan that it would have, you know, enhanced capability. And again, as Tomcat guys, we remember we started with an analog airplane that was strictly an air-to-air platform, and it finished life in 06, 07 as a airplane with digital flight controls that had smart weapons that did the heavy lifting at post 9/11 in a way that maybe only an A6 could have done. So what's the JSF program, in unclassed terms, along those lines?
Well, just to go back to what you said, it is a tiered approach. It was a 3-block approach for development, blocks 1, 2, and 3. And the different services had different stakes in the ground for where they wanted to declare their IOC. So it's a little bit different depending on which service you're talking about for what block capability that service demanded for IOC. So where we are right now in development, we're trying to finish up the development of the Block 2B capabilities, which is where the Marine Corps is going to IOC. The Navy is looking to IOC with Block 3F capability, so that's where we intend to get. Flight test for Block 3 capabilities is projected to extend into 2017. So we are, in actuality, only about halfway through the initial development plan that was scheduled for this airplane. And then there's a follow-on test and evaluation effort that's going to happen after that in order to continue to provide more capabilities and to keep this aircraft at the tip of the spear as we continue to employ it for the decades to come.
Next question, please.
What are some of the problems found in testing of the JSF that have been blown out of proportion?
Well, okay, I'll let them assess whether it's blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
But let's start, Sniff, with the tailhook situation. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, I missed the first part of that question, but I think it was
What are some of
what
the
problems
problems?
that have been blown out of proportion. Okay, so tailhook, I don't know if it's been blown out of proportion or not. It has been a major issue for this airplane, for the development of this airplane. It was something that was unexpected until it was discovered in test and evaluation. So the tailhook problem was a 2-part problem. The first was we were having trouble catching the wire, and obviously that's unsatisfactory. The second was a structural issue with the tailhook. So the loads path that attached the tailhook to the airframe was basically overstressing the bulkhead where the tailhook attached. We uncovered these problems back in 2011 when we first started doing our test and evaluation, our carrier suitability test and evaluation up in Lakehurst. And the engineers dived right in and started trying to first just assess what the problem really was, try to characterize the dynamics of both the loads issue and the inability to catch the wire. And the reason why the hook wasn't catching the wire, in layman's terms, basically the hold down damper pressure, the snubber pressure of the tail hook just wasn't strong enough. So the tail hook was kind of bouncing off of the flight deck surface. And then also as the jet lands and its main mounts hit first, it would compress the cross deck pennant, and then the tailhook shortly came thereafter. And there wasn't enough room between the main landing gear and the tailhook in order for the cross-deck pennant to rebound up to a significant height in order for the tailhook to catch the wire. So the easy fix there was really what they did is they sharpened the hook point. So the redesign took a couple years and about a year and a half, I should say, between the first identification of the problem and having a new tailhook put back on the aircraft. So where do we stand right now? We have one jet at Pax River that's been fully modified. Modification took about 4 months. We modded it at the end of last year and then took the jet back up to Lakehurst, which is where we do a lot of our initial loads testing, doing what we call roll-in arrestments. So basically we taxi into the arresting gear in building up in speeds in order to make sure that we're very careful not to overload the aircraft if something were to go wrong. We did over 30 roll-in arrestments with 100% successful engagements with the loads as expected. And then after that, we brought it back to Pax River and we started doing what we call our shake, rattle, and roll testing, which is where we do all of our off-nominal type of approaches to the wire at the field, where we do high sync and we do high attitude and nose down type of approaches. So we've gotten through 6 fly-in arrestments, all to successful engagements. So it's probably a little bit early. That sample size is still really small to say that we have definitely nailed this problem, but it looks like we're on the right path. So the aircraft is behaving as the engineers were predicting, and that's always a good thing in flight test.
So the other thing that comes out is, the airplane does not have a HUD. The HUD lives in your visor. So that's, to the layman, that's a very cool capability, but I know there are some challenges. Sniff, can you speak to some of that and what the fix is looking like and how we're tracking there?
Okay, so the helmet-mounted display, we refer to that as the HMD. It just like Ward just said, there is no heads-up display in the cockpit, so everything is projected onto the visor of your helmet, and it's a really neat capability. And when it gets to the fleet and it's working right, it's going to provide a lot of capability to our fleet operators to be able to seamlessly transition from day to night, to not have to depend on night vision goggles, and then also to be able to project video on